Once upon a time, in a distant land surrounded by mountains and lush forests, there was a prosperous kingdom that pulsed with the vibrant life of its people. In this setting, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama was born on a day marked by prodigies and auspicious signs. His mother, Queen Maya, gave birth beneath a flowering tree, as blossoms unfolded and birds sang in perfect harmony. The moment was so special that everyone in the court felt that something grand was about to unfold. Soon after his birth, wise men and seers were summoned to prophesy about the child's future. As the members of the court watched anxiously, an old sage stepped forward, his eyes shining with ancient knowledge. "This boy," he said in a deep, serene voice, "will become either a great king or a spiritual leader whose actions will change the fate of many." The kingdom buzzed with the news, but King Suddhodana, Siddhartha's father, felt a chill run down his spine. The idea that his son might choose a path of renunciation and meditation was unbearable. Determined to ensure that the prince became a powerful monarch, the king took drastic measures. He surrounded Siddhartha with all the luxuries of the world: grand palaces, endless treasures, and the most fascinating delights of life. "My son must never see pain, poverty, or death," the king thought, as he filled Siddhartha's days with pleasures. The young prince grew up in a world that was offered to him like a dream. But deep inside, a seed of curiosity and restlessness began to sprout. Despite his father's protection, something within Siddhartha urged him to seek more. He watched the parties and smiles around him, but felt that there was something deeper, a hidden truth beneath the surface of glamour. The stories he heard about the lives of his subjects seemed distant, almost like echoes of a world he had yet to know. And so, while others reveled in lives of pleasure, Siddhartha felt increasingly like a bird in a golden cage, trapped by invisible chains. The nights were filled with restless dreams, and the mornings brought a sense that something was about to happen. And then, one day, while riding through lush gardens and flowering fields, Siddhartha's curiosity exploded into a thought. What lies beyond the palace walls? With a racing heart, he decided it was time to unveil the mysteries of the world. Little did he know that the true journey of his life was about to begin. The prophecy made at his birth, the choice that was to come, would shape not only his destiny but the destiny of millions who would follow in his footsteps. Imagine a resplendent palace, built of white marble that sparkles under the scorching sun, surrounded by flower gardens where colors dance in perfect harmony. This is the home of Siddhartha Gautama, a place where happiness seems to be always at the door, yet, in truth, it hides the shadows of an unknown world. The corridors are filled with laughter, soft music, and the sweet scent of flowers. The servants, ever attentive, ensure that every wish of the prince is met. Siddhartha lives surrounded by comfort, each day filled with feasts and entertainment. He is the beloved heir, adored by his people and enveloped in beauty. However, behind this splendor lies a veil of protection that his father carefully wove. King Suddhodana made a vow. His son should never know pain, poverty, or suffering. For him, Siddhartha's life should be an eternal festival, far removed from the realities plaguing the kingdom. As the days unfurled like a beautiful silk tapestry, Siddhartha found himself enveloped in a routine of superficial joy. He participated in tournaments, danced at festivals, and reveled in the arts surrounding his world. However, amid all this splendor, a subtle restlessness began to emerge within him. It was like a gentle breeze passing, awakening a curiosity he could not ignore. One morning, while observing the flowers in the garden, Siddhartha wondered about life beyond the palace walls. He heard murmurs about the inhabitants of the city, their daily struggles, and the challenges they faced. There was something in their hearts that cried out for attention, and that call resonated within him. But whenever he raised his voice to question, he was quickly silenced by affectionate smiles and promises of more luxuries. The prince began to notice the small things that were not part of his gilded life. He saw how the gardeners toiled tirelessly, how the cooks worked hard to prepare dishes he would never taste. He observed the dancers moving gracefully, yet sensed that their smiles concealed the struggle to support their families. These moments awakened in him a growing curiosity, a desire to truly understand life, not just through the lens of his privilege. And so, Siddhartha's life continued, day after day, wrapped in a bubble of illusions. Although everyone around him seemed happy, a part of him longed for something deeper, for a meaning he could not quite identify. The palace, despite its wonders, became a gilded prison. He felt that something was missing, as if a great mystery was waiting to be unraveled, a call echoing within the palace walls and in his heart. And this restlessness, though silent, had planted the first seed of change. Siddhartha knew that, at any moment, he would have to confront the truth, a truth that could not be ignored for much longer. On a sunny day, Siddhartha decided it was time to explore the world beyond the palace walls. With a heart full of curiosity and a touch of nervousness, he asked his charioteer to take him for a ride through the city. The charioteer hesitated, but the prince's determination was infectious. And so, they set off, Siddhartha's excitement mingling with the anticipation of discovering what lay beyond his sheltered existence. As the carriage rolled along, the streets buzzed with life. People of all ages were busy with their daily tasks, selling goods in the market, tending to children, and sharing laughter. For Siddhartha, every face that passed by seemed to carry a story, a fragment of a life he had yet to know. But what fascinated him the most was the air of freedom that hung over the citizens, a freedom he felt was distant from his reality. And then, amidst the joy, something unexpected happened. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha spotted an elderly man, bent under the weight of years. His skin, wrinkled like a dry leaf, and his eyes, filled with melancholic wisdom, struck the prince deeply. Siddhartha stopped, a chill running down his spine. He turned to the charioteer, his voice trembling. "Why is he like this? Will this happen to me too?" The charioteer, now at a loss for words, could only nod. Siddhartha could not comprehend it. He had lived his entire life without ever imagining that old age could one day be his fate. What more lay in the world? As the carriage continued on, a second sign appeared. A man, pale and frail, struggled to walk by. He was visibly ill, each movement a battle. Siddhartha felt a knot form in his throat. Is this also part of life? He wondered, terrified by the possibility that pain and weakness could one day be his reality. And as if the universe wanted to reveal more, the prince soon encountered a funeral procession. The lamentations and tears of those accompanying a body in a coffin struck Siddhartha's heart like a blow. He watched in silence as the pain in the eyes of those bidding farewell to a loved one pierced him. Death, a concept so distant in his life of luxury, now became a palpable and terrifying presence. All of us will leave this world one day, he thought, the revelation weighing heavily on his chest. But then, amid this dark revelation, a fourth sign emerged. Siddhartha saw an ascetic, a man of tranquil appearance, sitting in meditation beneath a tree. There was something serene about his presence, as if he had made peace with the world and with himself. The contrast was shocking. While Siddhartha contemplated the pain of old age, illness, and death, that man seemed to have found an answer to the questions that tormented him. Why is he like this, so calm, so free? The prince wondered, feeling the need to understand that state of serenity. The ascetic possessed no material goods, yet radiated a light that enveloped him like a cloak. It was a silent testament that, despite the inevitability of suffering, there was a path that could lead to peace. With each sign, Siddhartha received a revelation about the fragility of life and the inevitability of suffering. He felt that the world he knew was not all there was. The protection his father provided now seemed a prison, and the truth he found outside awakened a deep thirst for answers within him. The prince stood on the brink of transformation, the shadow of doubt now illuminated by the pursuit of a new purpose. And as the charioteer took him back to the palace, Siddhartha knew his life would never be the same. He had seen what was hidden, and in his heart, the seed of change had been planted. That night, Siddhartha sat in his luxurious chamber, surrounded by fine fabrics and illuminated by lamps casting a soft, golden light. But the beauty around him could not overshadow the turmoil within his heart. The images of the four signs he had witnessed danced vividly in his mind, each more intense than the last. The laughter of the banquets he attended felt distant, almost like music that no longer touched his soul. The prince found himself confronted by an agonizing dilemma. How could he continue living a life of frivolities knowing that, outside, suffering was real and omnipresent? He rose and walked to the window, gazing into the darkness of the night. The stars shone in the sky, but inside him was a storm. The thought of leaving everything behind tormented him, but the prospect of accepting a life of illusions became unbearable. Siddhartha knew that if he wanted to uncover the truth about suffering, he would need to distance himself from the comfort he had always known. That night, while the palace slept in peace, he made the most important decision of his life. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, he dressed in simple clothes and gathered a few essential items. Nothing that would tie him to the past, only what he needed for the journey ahead. As he walked through the silent corridors, each step echoed like a heartbeat in his soul. He hesitated when he reached Yasodhara's and Rahul's chambers, taking one last glimpse of his old life. A part of him wished to stay, but the stronger part knew that his search for truth and freedom was a path he had to tread alone. The destiny awaiting him was greater than he could imagine. Siddhartha reached the palace gates and paused for a moment. The stars in the sky seemed to shine even brighter, as if beckoning him forward, encouraging him to take that step. With one last look at the place that had been his refuge, he turned and stepped out, breathing in the fresh night air. Freedom awaited him on the other side, but so did uncertainty. He knew the journey would be filled with challenges and trials, but the determination in his heart was greater than any fear. With each step he took, Siddhartha felt that he was moving away not only from the palace, but also from the chains that kept him bound to a life of illusions. And so, under the light of the stars, the prince set forth in search of truth, leaving behind what he knew to discover what it truly meant to live. The journey of self-discovery and transformation was just beginning, and the path ahead promised revelations that would change not only his life but the fate of many others. The moon shone brightly in the sky, illuminating the path Siddhartha had chosen. After leaving the palace, he felt the freedom in every step, but also the loneliness of one who strayed from a known life. The prince was unsure of where he was heading, but his heart pulsed with the determination to find answers. Soon, he arrived at a small village, where rumors of spiritual masters reverberated among the people. Siddhartha, determined to learn all he could, began his search for the wise men who could guide him on the road to self-discovery. He met the first master, Siddhartha Gautama, a man of profound wisdom and penetrating gaze. Siddhartha's teachings promised a path to liberation through meditation and mastery of the mind. Siddhartha surrendered to this new learning. The discipline was rigorous and challenging. He spent hours in meditation, seeking the attainment of nothingness, the ability to transcend desires and the pains of the world. With each session, he felt closer to a state of peace, but inside, an unsettling restlessness persisted. He realized that, although he had achieved this new form of consciousness, he had not yet found the answer to the deepest question of his soul. How do we free ourselves from suffering? After months under Siddhartha's tutelage, Siddhartha said goodbye. He wanted more. He remembered the ascetic he had seen in the city, the tranquility in his gaze, and the peace that seemed to radiate from him. In search of something deeper and more intense, Siddhartha found his next mentor, Udraka Ramaputra, another renowned master. With Udraka, the prince immersed himself in even harsher practices. This master taught techniques to suppress desires and reach a state that hovers between being and non-being. Siddhartha dedicated himself completely, challenging his limits. He became a strict ascetic, reducing his intake to a single grain of rice per day, neglecting his body in an unending pursuit of liberation. His body, once robust and healthy, became a shadow of its former self. However, as his physical condition deteriorated, the clarity he sought seemed further away. He realized that the pain and suffering he was trying to escape were intensifying with each passing day. One morning, just as he was about to faint from weakness, Siddhartha stumbled upon a river. The cool water embraced him, awakening a wave of life that he hadn't felt in a long time. In that moment, he recalled the woman who had offered him a bit of rice milk, Sujata, who had seen him as a spirit of the forest. The simple act of kindness made Siddhartha reflect on what was truly necessary for life. With his mind clearing, Siddhartha recognized that he had lost himself in his quest for extreme asceticism, that suffering was not the answer he sought, but rather a balanced path that would lead him to enlightenment. He finally understood that excessive denial and radical renunciation could also be forms of attachment, attachments that kept him bound in a cycle of pain. With this new realization, Siddhartha decided to abandon the rigorous ascetic practices. He distanced himself from the masters who had guided him, aware that true understanding could not be found in extremes, but in the middle way. That decision, though difficult, gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the true journey was just beginning and that soon, he would need to find the place where he could finally sit and meditate beneath a tree, a sacred space where the answers awaited him. Thus, Siddhartha set off in search of a new path, ready to discover the essence of life and, perhaps, find what it truly meant to be free. After days of searching and reflecting, Siddhartha felt like a boat adrift in a vast ocean. The intensity of his journey had taken him to extremes, but at the same time, it left him with a profound sense of helplessness. As he walked through the forest, he remembered the lessons of his masters, but now they seemed fragmented and distant, like echoes of a time that brought no answers. One morning, while wandering down a narrow path, his feet led him to the bank of a river. The water flowed freely, glistening in the sunlight. Siddhartha stopped, hypnotized by the continuous flow. It was a spectacle of beauty and strength. The water, in its constant movement, seemed to dance and sing, as if telling a story of transformation. He approached, knelt down, and as he plunged his hand into the current, he felt the freshness awaken his dormant senses. But what captivated him most was the sound of the river, how it did not fight against the stones or the dirt but simply flowed, contouring and molding everything in its path. A revelation began to arise in his mind, and he felt connected to those waters, as if nature were sharing a deep secret with him. This is how life should be, he thought. The river did not care about the stones or obstacles. It simply followed its course. It did not cling to the pain of a fall or the pleasure of being in a calm stream. In its essence, there was a teaching he needed to understand. Life, like the river, is in constant movement and transformation, and trying to hold onto something or resist the current would only bring more suffering. With this new understanding, Siddhartha stood up and decided it was time to change his approach. He didn't need to deprive himself of everything to find the truth. Instead, he should embrace life in its entirety, its joys, sorrows, pains, and pleasures. The idea of a middle way began to take shape in his mind, a synthesis that united both spiritual pursuit and human experience. He realized that, by letting go of expectations and attachments, he could fully experience life, just like the flowing river. It was not about renouncing everything, but about understanding that happiness and pain are part of the same cycle. With a light heart, Siddhartha turned away from the riverbank, but the wisdom he found there remained etched in his soul. Now, he was ready to seek the place where he would sit beneath a tree and meditate, a location that would become sacred on his journey. The revelation he had beside the river was not just an answer, but the first step toward true enlightenment. With each step he took, Siddhartha felt that freedom was drawing closer, like a friend waiting eagerly for him. Life was calling him, and he was prepared to listen to what it had to teach. After days of walking, Siddhartha finally arrived at Bodh Gaya, a place filled with palpable and sacred energy. The trees stood tall, their sturdy trunks and green leaves like a natural refuge, embracing life and serenity. But one tree in particular caught his attention. A fig tree that seemed older than time itself, its roots intertwined in the soil, as if anchored in ancestral wisdom. It was the Bodhi Tree, and beneath its branches, Siddhartha felt he was about to find what he had been seeking. The shade of the tree offered a welcoming refuge, and as he sat beneath its boughs, he felt a wave of peace wash over him. But at the same time, a storm of thoughts and feelings battled within him. He did not want to rise without understanding the true nature of life and suffering. The burning desire for enlightenment pulsed in his heart, and in a moment of determination, he made a vow. I will stay here until I find the truth. The first days beneath the Bodhi tree were marked by intense meditation. Siddhartha closed his eyes and plunged into his essence, confronting fears and doubts that had accumulated in his mind. He felt the pains of the past, the memories of his life in the palace, and the lessons from his masters. Each breath was a battle. The resistance of the ego manifested in distractions, unfulfilled desires, and old patterns that insisted on emerging. But he did not allow himself to be swayed. The determination burned within him like an unquenchable fire. With each breath, he deepened his connection with the tree, allowing its wisdom to envelop him. All suffering is temporary. The voice of the river echoed in his mind. Siddhartha allowed himself to feel, to confront, and ultimately to release the chains that kept him bound. In the following days, as the sky shifted from blue to gold, Siddhartha realized that time was becoming an illusion. He was not just sitting beneath the tree. He had become part of nature, part of the universe. Each leaf that rustled in the wind seemed to whisper secrets. Each bird that sang brought a new melody of wisdom. The murmurs of the outside world blended with the silence within, and peace began to fill the void in his heart. And then, on the night of the full moon, everything changed. Siddhartha felt as if he were floating between worlds as the silvery light enveloped his body in a mantle of tranquility. In an instant that felt both ephemeral and eternal, understanding dawned. Suffering was not a burden to be carried but an experience to be comprehended. He saw the connections between all things, the impermanence of life, and the interdependence of being. With this revelation, enlightenment seized him like a penetrating ray of light. Siddhartha awakened to the truth that suffering arises from attachment, and that by letting go, he could live in harmony with the flow of life. The Four Noble Truths blossomed in his mind, clear and crystalline, like the water of a newly birthed river. When dawn began to break on the horizon, Siddhartha opened his eyes, no longer a prince in search, but the Buddha, the enlightened one. The transformation was profound and total. He felt the unity with everything around him, a connection with all beings who had ever lived and would ever live. Life, in all its complexity and beauty, was a miracle in itself. The Bodhi tree witnessed this rebirth, and Siddhartha, now Buddha, rose. He knew he had a mission, to share this truth with the world. Suffering could be overcome, and he felt compelled to teach others how to free themselves from the chains of attachment and ignorance. With a heart full of compassion and understanding, Buddha was ready for the next stage of his journey, to carry the light of wisdom to those still lost in darkness. With his newly discovered clarity and the strength of his enlightenment pulsating within him, Buddha began his journey to share his revelations with the world. He knew his mission was vital. Many were still trapped in the chains of suffering, seeking answers in places that offered no relief. Determined to bring hope and understanding, Buddha made his way to Sarnath, where he would meet the first disciples who had abandoned their ascetic lives. Upon arriving at Sarnath, he found a small group of 5 men, former companions who had been his friends during his ascetic experiences. They were skeptical, doubting that anyone could truly understand the pain they faced. But Buddha, with his aura of serenity and wisdom, knew the time had come to convey his truths. Sitting in a quiet spot beneath a tree, he called to them, and they gathered around him. "Friends," began Buddha, his voice soft yet firm, "I come in search of liberation for all of us. I have discovered the Four Noble Truths, and they can free us from the suffering that torments us." The disciples, initially hesitant, listened intently. The first noble truth was revealed. Life is suffering. Buddha explained that suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience, manifesting in various ways, through pain, loss, and dissatisfaction. This truth was not a burden but a reality that, once accepted, could lead to liberation. The second noble truth followed. Suffering is caused by desire. He explained that our attachment to things, people, and even ideas generates pain. When we cling, we create an endless cycle of desire and frustration. Awareness of this was the first step toward transformation. Buddha's words began to resonate, and the atmosphere grew charged with the truth he shared. But there is a third truth, Buddha continued, the light in his eyes reflecting hope. The cessation of suffering is possible. He spoke of the possibility of liberation, of a state in which we are no longer dominated by desire. With compassion in his heart, Buddha encouraged his listeners to envision a future where they could live in peace, free from the chains that bound them. Finally, Buddha presented the fourth noble truth. There is a path that leads to the cessation of suffering. This path, he explained, was the Noble Eightfold Path, a series of practices that included right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. It was a way of life that promoted balance and harmony, allowing each person to achieve true inner peace. As Buddha spoke, something magical began to happen. The disciples felt a wave of understanding and liberation flowing among them. The truths that had once seemed distant and complex now became accessible and deeply meaningful. Tears began to shimmer in the eyes of some, not from sadness, but from a newfound hope dawning on the horizon. "I see now," said one of the disciples, his voice trembling but filled with emotion. "If this is true, then freedom is within our reach." And as Buddha's words penetrated their souls, a transformation began to take place. They were no longer lost men. They were becoming seekers of truth. Buddha, observing this metamorphosis, felt his heart swell. He had brought light to those in darkness, and with each new understanding, the flame of wisdom expanded. With love and compassion, he promised, together, we can explore these truths and experience them in our lives. And so, beneath the shade of the trees in Sarnath, the seeds of Dharma were planted. The Four Noble Truths, like flowers blossoming in spring, began to flourish in the hearts of those who gathered around Buddha. With the certainty that true transformation was possible, they were ready to follow their new master in the quest for freedom and a profound understanding of life. As the dawn light filtered through the trees in Sarnath, a new chapter was about to begin. Buddha, now illuminated and filled with compassion, watched his first disciples with a mix of joy and reverence. Those men, who once sought truth through extreme practices, were now open to a new path, ready to learn and grow under the guidance of one who had found freedom. The disciples, captivated by the Four Noble Truths, felt as if they had awakened from a long dream. Among them was Kondinya, who had always been one of the most skeptical. He looked at Buddha with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "Do you really believe we can free ourselves from suffering?" he asked, doubt still present in his voice. Buddha smiled, a smile that conveyed deep understanding. "I not only believe it, Kondinya. I know this path and am here to guide you. Together, we can embark on this journey." Buddha's words pierced the hearts of the disciples like the sun's rays breaking through a long winter. They were no longer mere followers. They had become part of something greater, a community in search of truth. And so, under the Bodhi Tree, Buddha began to teach the Noble Eightfold Path. He explained each of its facets with patience, inviting the disciples to reflect on their lives. Right understanding, right intention, right speech. Each teaching seemed to open doors within them, revealing new horizons that once seemed distant. As the days went by, the small community began to grow stronger. The disciples practiced together, sharing their experiences and grappling with their doubts. Each teaching became a cornerstone in their new lives, and with each victory over ignorance and attachment, their bonds deepened. They were not alone in their journeys. They were now brothers and sisters in search of the same truth. Kondinya, who had initially been the most skeptical, began to change. He remembered his days of asceticism and the emptiness he felt even amid suffering. Hearing Buddha, he started to see the practices that had merely been an escape, while the true path required confronting the reality of suffering and finding an answer to it. One clear morning, when Buddha was teaching about right speech, Kondinya raised his hand and said, "I understand now. Speech should not be used to deceive, but to liberate. We must be honest, not only with others but with ourselves." Kondinya's words resonated among the disciples, and Buddha nodded with a satisfied smile. "Yes, Kondinya, truth is liberating, and recognizing our own truth is the first step toward transformation." The group began to realize that each of them brought their own emotional baggage and experiences, but together, they could walk towards understanding and healing. Buddha's teachings spread rapidly among his followers. They began to practice what they learned in their daily lives, and soon others, drawn by the message of hope and liberation, started to join the group. The small community, once just a handful of men, began to grow in number and diversity. With each new disciple who joined them, Buddha not only shared his wisdom but also learned from them. Each question, every doubt, and every individual victory became a valuable lesson, and the practice of Dharma grew richer and deeper. The atmosphere around them was vibrant, filled with laughter, tears, and moments of profound introspection. As the community expanded, Buddha realized he was not just shaping disciples. He was planting the seeds of a new era, a path that was not only about the individual search for enlightenment, but also about building a network of support, compassion, and love among all beings. With this clear vision, he felt more determined than ever to continue his mission. And so, Buddha's first disciples became not only his followers, but also the bearers of a message that would change the world. Together, they were not just seeking truth. They were creating a movement that transcended time and space, a light that would shine for those still lost in darkness. As the days passed and the community of disciples flourished, Buddha began to share one of his deepest and most powerful revelations, the middle way. In front of an ever-growing audience, he would sit beneath the shade of the trees, the soft light filtering through the leaves, creating an atmosphere of peace and serenity. The curious and eager looks of his followers reflected the anticipation of discovering what this truly meant. "Friends," began Buddha, his voice firm and clear, "for a long time, I sought the truth through extreme suffering and total renunciation. I clung to practices that, though well-intentioned, did not bring the true freedom I sought." A murmur swept through the crowd, the disciples exchanging glances, absorbing every word. "But in submitting myself to rigorous asceticism, I realized that suffering is not the answer. True understanding does not reside in denying oneself, but in accepting who we are and the reality of life." He paused, allowing his words to resonate, as the truth began to penetrate the minds of his listeners. The middle way is a balanced life, where we find harmony between pleasure and pain, between indulgence and denial. We must not cling to extremes, for both lead to suffering. Instead, we should live with wisdom and compassion, seeking to understand the nature of things. Buddha then described the extremes he had faced. On one side lies the life of excess, where we seek pleasure without limits, and on the other side, the life of extreme austerity, where we deny our needs and desires. Both paths fail to bring us peace. What we need is balance, a path that allows us to appreciate the beauty of life without losing ourselves in its ties. The disciples listened intently, the light of understanding beginning to shine in their eyes. It was as if each of them were reconnecting with a truth that had always been there, but had been forgotten under the weight of expectations and traditions. We live in a world where things are in constant flux, and impermanence is the only certainty. Buddha continued, gesturing gently with his hands. We must learn to release the binds of desire and aversion, to appreciate life in its entirety. The middle way is not a path of renunciation, but a path of understanding. He shared a story that profoundly touched the hearts of the disciples. Buddha spoke of an archer who, when shooting an arrow, must find the perfect balance between force and precision. If the bowstring is too loose, the arrow will not reach its target. If it is too tight, the arrow will break. So it is with life, he explained. It is necessary to find the point of balance to reach our true nature and the peace that resides within us. As Buddha's words filled the air, a new determination arose within the group. The disciples were ready to apply the middle way to their lives, prepared not only to seek enlightenment, but to live the message of balance and compassion that Buddha had shared. They were now part of a new era, where the light of understanding and freedom began to shine more brightly, reflecting the path they had chosen to walk together. Time passed, and the small community of disciples had grown in number and strength under Buddha's guidance. They wandered from village to village, sharing the teachings of the middle way and bringing hope to all who crossed their path. But life is fleeting, and a new chapter was about to unfold. One afternoon, as they walked toward a village, Buddha began to feel different. A slight weakness enveloped him, but he continued to teach, tirelessly dedicated to spreading his message. However, there was a shadow of wisdom in his eyes. a consciousness that his journey was approaching an end. He knew that death was an inevitable part of life, a truth he had always accepted with serenity. Upon arriving at a small village, his disciples surrounded him, feeling a mix of joy and concern. Buddha, sensing the restlessness in their hearts, decided it was time to share a special moment with them. He invited them to gather around a simple table adorned with fresh fruits and rustic bread. It was a simple meal, yet full of meaning. As they sat together, Buddha looked at each of them, his eyes filled with love and compassion. "Friends," he began, "today we celebrate not just the food we have, but the connection we share. This moment is precious, and I want each of you to know that the true nature of life is not found in material possessions, but in the relationships we cultivate and the understanding we seek together." The disciples listened attentively, their hearts heavy, as if sensing that this might be a farewell. During the meal, they laughed, shared stories, and reminisced about their journeys together. But as the conversation deepened, Buddha began to speak about impermanence, the essence of life and death. Just as this bread is made to be broken and shared, our lives are like bread. With every moment, we draw closer to the inevitable. But we must not fear death. Instead, we should embrace it as part of the journey. His voice was gentle, yet there was a weight in his words that resonated in every heart present. As the meal continued, one disciple, Ananda, could not hold back his tears. "Master, how can we live without you? Your presence is the light that guides us." Buddha smiled tenderly and replied, "The light you see in me is the same light that exists in each of you. Be like a flame that radiates warmth and understanding. My presence will always be with you, for the Dharma lives in your hearts." That night, as the full moon illuminated the sky, Buddha felt a premonition that he was about to depart. He withdrew to a quiet place, accompanied only by Ananda. Lying beneath the shade of a tree, he began to meditate. Serenity enveloped him like a cloak, as the sounds of nature grew increasingly distant. After a moment of deep reflection, Buddha opened his eyes and spoke to Ananda. "I feel that my journey in this physical form is coming to an end. I am ready to enter nirvana, to free myself from the cycle of birth and death." Ananda, troubled, asked, "What will we do without you, Master?" Buddha responded with a serene smile, "Continue to teach what you have learned. Remember the Four Noble Truths and the Middle Way. Knowledge is the key to freedom, and you have everything you need within yourselves." At that moment, the moonlight seemed to shine even brighter, and a profound calm enveloped the night. Buddha closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the peace that always accompanied him. He then surrendered to meditation, a state of being where pain and pleasure become one. The news of Buddha's death spread quickly among the disciples and villagers. Morning settled in, but the message of love and compassion he had left behind resonated in every heart. They gathered to honor their master, recalling the lessons he had shared throughout his life. After his death, Buddha was cremated, and his remains were divided among the disciples, who buried them in stupas around the kingdom. Each stupa would become a place of veneration and learning, a reminder of the path he had charted. The teachings of Buddha, infused with love and understanding, would continue to flourish in the souls of those who followed him. As the disciples gazed at the flames of the cremation, a new determination arose in their hearts. They were not just losing a master, they were gaining a responsibility. Buddha's legacy would not die with him, for his words and teachings would live on through them, guiding them in the journey of life and freedom. The sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, as if nature itself were honoring the great master who had departed. The villages around Sarnath were filled with people gathering around the places where Buddha had taught, their hearts pulsating with a new understanding. Buddha's legacy, now stronger than ever, was a testament that wisdom and compassion could change the world. The disciples, now deeply committed to the mission of sharing the Dharma, began to travel from village to village, like a river flowing, bringing life and hope to all they encountered. Each of them carried the light of the teaching, the certainty that true transformation begins within each of us. With their hearts warmed by love and determination, they were ready to face the challenge of disseminating Buddha's message. In each village, The disciples gathered curious groups of people eager to hear the truths that had once seemed so distant. The Four Noble Truths and the Middle Way became the core of the lessons they shared. Most people had already experienced suffering in their lives. The pain of loss, the daily struggle for survival, and the desire for happiness became familiar echoes, making Buddha's message a balm for their souls. Soon, what began as a small group of followers transformed into a growing movement known as the Sangha. This community of practitioners was not merely a gathering of individuals in search of enlightenment. It was a network of support and understanding that crossed boundaries, uniting people from different backgrounds and cultures under the banner of love and compassion. As the message of Buddha spread, the first stupas began to be constructed in his honor. These monuments became sanctuaries where the faithful could gather, meditate, and reflect on the Master's teachings. Each stupa was not merely a stone structure. It was a symbol of inner transformation and a place of veneration where the light of the Dharma could shine. Over the years, many rulers and leaders turned to Buddha's teachings. Among them was Emperor Ashoka, who reigned over a vast portion of India and embraced Buddhism, becoming one of the greatest proponents of the Dharma. Ashoka recognized that peace and compassion were the true forces that could unite his people. He sent missionaries to other regions, bringing Buddha's message to distant lands, where the ideas of the Middle Way began to take root in fertile soil. Buddha's lessons, which had begun in a small village, began to take root in cultures around the world. Buddhism was no longer merely a philosophy. It became a way of life. Practices of meditation, compassion, and mindfulness began to be woven into the daily lives of millions. People began to see the beauty in impermanence, learning to cherish each moment and find joy in the little things. And so, Buddha's legacy did not remain confined to his teachings, but expanded into a movement that transcended boundaries. Over time, his ideas crossed oceans, reaching lands such as Japan, China, Tibet, and finally the West. In each new land, the Dharma adapted and transformed, but the essence remained the same: the pursuit of understanding, inner peace, and compassion for one another. Today, Buddha's legacy lives not only in scriptures and monuments, but in the lives of millions who dedicate themselves to following the Middle Way. Those who practice meditation, who seek to live with wisdom and compassion, are witnesses to the profound impact a single enlightened being can have on the world. In every act of kindness, in every gesture of compassion, Buddha's spirit continues to shine, guiding and illuminating the path for future generations. And so, the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, becomes not only a narrative of the past but a beacon of hope and wisdom that remains present in our days. His legacy teaches us that, regardless of the difficulties we face, there is always a path to peace, understanding, and true freedom. It is a legacy that lives in each of us, a reminder that the quest for truth and compassion is a journey that never ends, but is always worth taking.